Good luck in the contest and have a good weekend. This is Golf 6 India Papa uniform. Good luck. Good luck. This is. Over. This is.
Hello and welcome to the brand new episode of Chatter. That's right, we're back. We've got a new intro tune and a big list of new guests that we're going to have on the show. I've been off working in Austria and finishing my very first book, Brexit, the Establishment, Civil War. So that's going to be available to pre-order very soon, so keep an eye out on our website or social media for the link. You can also sign up to our mailing list to get updates on new content and details about the book release, or visit the website establishmentcivilwar.co.uk. Now on to the show. Our guest today is Jackon Rawlings. Now, some of you may remember about 18 months ago, we did a podcast with Jackson on his politics and philosophy site, The Politicalists. We actually recorded that episode on a houseboat near King's Cross, but sadly the coronavirus means we were bereft of such luxuries on this occasion. In this episode, we chatted all about his upcoming video series called This Modern Philosophy. The link is in the description. About how Corona could potentially upend our entire world and how it functions, or potentially change very little at all. So thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, and I hope you enjoy the show. So Jackson, it's nice to have you back on the show.
Hi there. Yeah, good to be back.
Quarantine times should be the perfect time for everyone to be spending hours and hours listening to podcasts. So since we have hours and hours in which to make them, it seemed only natural that I would start a new set of podcasts. So the whole Covid-19 crisis is throwing out a lot of questions in terms of how we organize almost every single part of society. Do you think that the current pandemic is proving that our level of global cooperation is insufficient, that we need a more powerful global body with which to respond to these kind of issues, or is it kind of proving that each individual country needs their own government and their own powers in which to deal with whatever crisis it may be, global or more national, by themselves?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I think you're right in the sense that it's showing that the current system is inefficient. It's not necessarily working to the way in the way that we would hope we would be able to deal with a crisis of this kind of magnitude. It's creaking, particularly when you look at the British response to this pandemic. I think it's been slow. It's been kind of ponderous in terms of how quickly they've been able to mobilise the necessary resources. If you look at, the United States has been the same. And there have been, issues in every country. It's a completely unusual experience for everyone. But I think you're right. The problems that were already being highlighted with the existing systems in place have now just been kind of magnified by this crisis. And so, do I think we need a centralized world government? I'm not sure about a centralized world government. I think there's arguments to suggest that greater cooperation between nations is 100% necessary. I think there are ways that smaller, localized states are better positioned to act in order to kind of solve the problems of their more local area. So it definitely a bigger collaboration across borders, but I think that we are not at the stage of wanting that kind of all-seeing eye quite yet.
In a way, the fact that each individual nation has broken it down in their own style, or they've attempted to deal with it in their own more tailored way to the level of crisis in each specific country, is actually going to play out quite interestingly post-pandemic. Is going to give us a nice look at who dealt with it best and what were the best responses, because ultimately at the moment I'm finding it interesting as to, so a lot of people are calling for strict, really harsh lockdown measures, as harsh as possible to make sure that we flatten the curve as such. But I find that it's it's going to be really interesting in about 6 to 12 months when you've had the world start to open up again and society start to move again, and whether the UK will actually end up, quite by accident, better off than countries who, administered like a full lockdown, because we won't be as badly hit by a second or third wave because so many of our population have actually been exposed to it. Which is is basically trying to look at whether the government's like herd immunity idea would have worked, but through their just sheer incompetence and failure to move quickly on it. And the real cynic in me believes that might be mildly deliberate, but I don't think it is. It's like, do you think we're gonna see the British government's like response justified in the end, or do you think they'll still be getting critiques no matter what they do?
No, I don't think they're going to come out of it looking too great. I think that we have, if you look at the early stages of the crisis, and I mean, I'm talking, when I say early stage, I'm not talking about when it started in China, in December and January, but at least sort of beginning of March or end of February, there were warning signs that were being flagged up by all sorts of countries and national bodies that were kind of saying this is time to take this seriously. And at that same moment, we had Boris Johnson going out and saying he wants to shake hands with everyone in hospital, and his dad saying that he's going to still go to the pub because it's his British right to do so. And he attended a rugby match, I think, in the middle of March, and because of that, according to some of the officials, that's why Cheltenham went ahead, because they looked at his example and said, well, Cheltenham can go ahead because he went to the Prime Minister was at an event of similar size, and now they're saying that Cheltenham was probably one of the starting pistols for the whole kind of crisis in this country in terms of how it spread. So I think that there are arguments to suggest that they had tried to kind of position themselves in a different way to some other countries. The idea of this herd immunity concept. I mean, I think that the herd immunity thing is just plain wrong. The idea that we could achieve that without fully understanding the disease, first of all, and secondly, having no vaccine in place. Like if it was the case that we had either of those two things in place, an understanding of the disease or a vaccine, perhaps you could make an argument for a herd immunity strategy. But I think the reality is we didn't have either of those. It was a kind of British exceptionalism at play that we've seen, a time and again in recent years. And I think that that's essentially what's happened is we've thought maybe we can try and do something a bit different, or Boris and Dominic Cummings and whoever else thought maybe they could do something different and come out of this smelling of roses. And I think they're going to end up. There's going to be some serious questions for them to answer after this. If anything, I'd actually like to be wrong. As much as I'm not a fan of Boris and Dominic Cummings, but I would much rather be proven wrong that the strategy has somehow paid off and we are actually better off at the end of it. I know there are some, there's been a resurgence in China recently of cases. So this idea of a second wave potentially is something to be considered. Also, you've got to take into account the economic question as well. The longer that the economy is shut down, the harder it is going to be to bounce back from that. But yeah, my personal view is that countries like New Zealand and countries like South Korea are going to come out of it looking like the ones that have taken it seriously, Germany as well. And we're going to end up having some serious questions to be answered.
Is this kind of proving that our current system and like our understanding of representative democracy as a concept, is it proven that it can keep up with the trials and tribulations of the modern world? Or the slow moving wheels of our very bureaucratic and sort of time consuming method of governance, like, are they increasingly just useless, and that technology and the sort of sheer pace of the globalized world and the speed at which problems can become global problems, is that proving that our current system isn't going to work anymore? Like, is there still room for that, our our current understanding of representative democracy to work in a world in which things can move so fast?
So I think that there's kind of two views on it. Essentially, that our system itself, the British parliamentary system, is potentially one that is outdated and is struggling to keep up with the times. But if you look at other countries, if you look at places I mentioned before, New Zealand and Scandinavian countries, Holland, they have representative democracy in place, but it's a different kind of representative democracy. It's got a different level of accountability built into it. It's got a different system, structure from the off. Most of them have got some kind of proportional system in place or something like that. So I think that the idea that democracy or representative democracy is done and dusted is not necessarily the case, but I do think that we are moving towards what is going to need to be a more kind of direct form of democracy. I think that in the past, direct democracy was, is unfeasible in a world where we had, limited or slow technology. Direct democracy wasn't going to work, and in countries that are, of a large population size. But now I think that you have to look at the fact that we do have technology that is making this kind of thing feasible at this point, and I think it's as good a time as any to question whether it's required now, something along those lines.
So you mentioned direct democracy. Now that's something I definitely wanted to get into a little later, but in terms of that, like the general argument against direct democracy has always been that people don't have the necessary time or understanding of major issues that could affect us, and that the reason we have representatives is to elect them to make the best decisions on our behalf. Even if we have the ability to implement some forms of direct democracy where we say have online polls or voting or online referendum on even just like minor issues, like do you really believe that like the public can be trusted in the least condescending way ever? Like, I'm not saying that I should be trusted personally. I'm just saying that, like, do we trust the people to make that decision, especially given like people's despair at the last 4 to 5 years of political discourse of just stupidity and ignorance and just complete misunderstanding of any technical issues whatsoever on both sides of the debate. Like, Remainers that I know understand about as much as the European Union as Brexiteers that are desperate to leave it, and that like is the square root of zero. Like, they know nothing. Like, do we trust like the British public to make decisions for all of us?
It's a very good question, and I think probably if we're really honest with ourselves, the answer at the moment is no. You look at what the thing is I'd be hesitant to blame. I don't want to blame the British public for their lack of understanding. It's a case of twofold issue really, is that we have had a lack of education on citizenship and political engagement in this country, forever. That's never been something that we've ever had. And equally, what should then be doing that job as we grow out of school and into the real world is the media. The media should be able to inform us about these issues, and the British media has got to be one of the worst at that in the world. And I think, well,
they're the least trusted in Europe.
Exactly. I mean, there's no doubt that the British media is not fit for purpose in its current form. And even the BBC, which had previously been considered, something more akin to a reputable source, I think has shown at times in the last couple of years that even that is not free from bias on both sides. Again, it's the classic thing of right wingers think it's left wing and left wingers think it's right wing, but that doesn't necessarily mean that therefore it's neutral. And that's the big issue we've got to recently with the BBC is actually it just means that it is biased on the right and it's biased on the left sometimes. So my concern with with this prospect of trying to implement something akin to a direct democracy in this country is as you say, that the British public are not well informed on the issues because of the lack of education and because of the lack of a quality media. But I don't think that should stop us from trying. I think that should be that we should have it as a goal. As you know, I'd rather be optimistic about the prospect of it than say, well, it's just never going to happen because we've not got that kind of system. I'm a realist and an optimist in my view that there are ways we can definitely improve the system, and I think that by improving the media, improving the education system, we could definitely get to that point, and then there's still a way to go, but we might at least be at the 0 point then from where we can work. So yeah, it's going to be a difficult slog. But again, as I say, and as you started at the beginning, I think there's no better time than to be discussing these things than right now, because what's going to happen after this is all up for grabs. So we might as well start making our case for it now.
Yeah, no, I take your point. Something I would like to actually point out as a fantastic example of how this could realistically work was, I believe, 2 years ago at the Labour Party conference. I remember reading quite a lengthy piece in Red Pepper, this like London-based socialist magazine, about how they were educating members of the Labour Party on whatever motions were being voted on. So there was maybe, I'm not sure how many thousand people there able to vote on motions, but every single one on the Momentum app, every vote that had to take place, they would provide information on arguments for and against, and then explain why Momentum themselves, like a faction within the Labour Party, were suggesting that their members vote one way or the other. But all the information was available for anyone to see. And obviously there are issues there with bias depending on who's producing the points. But I think it gives like an interesting way in which they could you could use this idea maybe in smaller groups, which makes me think that probably the best way to give people more power is not to expand direct democracy to the entire country for huge, like, sweeping issues with different tiny, like, hundreds and thousands of different little nuances, like such as, say, one's membership of the European Union. I think that direct democracy has the potential to work on a more local level. There's actually a guy.
Absolutely.
There's a guy in Northern Ireland who was a few years ago working on a system called SUST, in which he could get like local opinions on local issues and then feed it to politicians in like city councils or town councils in order to like give them an idea of how people were feeling about like little issues within their community, like placements of roundabouts, or how they were going to upgrade a park or a leisure center. And that probably, like, I would say that's a much better model for like opening up direct democracy than saying holding like weekly referendums on everything from like the tax on milk to like our international trade policy. That's just something I don't think I would trust many people with, including the cabinet. Like I still don't honestly see how that gets past the people are wonderful, right? They're stupid, irrational, prejudiced, paranoid, selfish people, like everyone in some way or another. Like, honestly, I don't see how you, even with like I'm a big critic of the media in this country, but how do you think we get past all those wonderful and awful human traits, even if we're being provided with the right information? Like, do you still believe that people are the best people, or the best vehicle through which we should make international or like national governing decisions?
Well, so I think the key is that we're not aiming for perfect here. It's not. There are always going to be innate flaws within human judgment and humans themselves. I believe that people are. I think people on the whole are going to aim for the common good, if they are given the right tools to do so. whether that common good is a manifestation of multiple individuals' desires and goods, or whether that common good is a broader kind of a holistic take on the kind of the whole of humanity generally, or whole of a subset of humanity. That's I think the biggest question is can we essentially what the capitalist system managed to briefly realize in the kind of 20th century was a way to use humans, the flaws of humanity, in order to progress humanity, right? That was what the capitalist system was doing. Greed and envy and desire and want for new things. What I think we need to try and work out is how can we kind of flip that? How can we use the best of humanity in order to progress humanity? So how can we make sure that the kind of spirit that has clearly flourished in this time, with people going out and delivering food to their neighbours and kind of making that kind of community feel come back. How do we kind of build a system based on that and emphasize the benefits of those endeavours and those actions? That's what I think we need to get to, because I think we are currently talking within the previous paradigm of what that society was built on, which is essentially rational, self-interested bastards. And what we almost want to get away from that. We want to get away from this idea of these individuals. That's what humans are, and actually, reverse the Thatcherism of there is no such thing as society. We want there to be a society again, and that I think will make a big. If that's the base level of how of what our country is like, what system's like, then from there everything else will kind of build on. And yes, there's going to be people who don't act to the benefit of society and people who act and make poor decisions, but as a whole, hopefully we would then be pushing towards a more kind of beneficial common goal. That's kind of where I think we need to get to with it.
What do you think of the idea of a citizens assembly? Like, have you explored that much?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a citizens assembly would be perfect for a kind of a second chamber. So if we were to kind of refresh the current parliamentary system, you get rid of the Lords, and instead you had citizens, or the Commons and a citizens assembly, one or the other. I think you still need, at this stage, some sort of representative chamber as well. So, but I do think that representative chamber should be, and I remember mentioning it last time we had a chat, was the idea of making it more of a collaborative kind of system rather than an adversarial system. And I think that would make a huge difference if you were to kind of rearrange the whole structure and purpose of the part of one of the chambers of Parliament, whether it's Commons or Lords, in order to be a collaborative system. Whether if it was physically made into a kind of circle that you see this in parliaments and governments everywhere else in the world, built on a proportional system and a consensus style government rather than an adversarial government. And I think that then combined with, as you say, a citizens assembly of some description, where people are kind of brought in on an almost like a jury duty kind of situation, to vote on certain key issues, maybe on a regional basis, something like that. That would, for me, that would be a great start. Absolutely.
Is there any other like obvious or sort of significant changes you would make to improve our current suggestions? Like anything absolutely wild that you feel like going for, like AI overlord?
I do think that there will need to be a point where, if you were to go down the route of direct democracy, or towards a more direct democracy with something like a citizens assembly, but also, because I don't think a citizens assembly alone is enough. I think that would be a good symbol of that move towards direct democracy. But I think you would also still want to have something where people were just regularly engaging with politics, and in that scenario, there's also a limit to how much we want people engaging, but also how much people will engage. people have got other, they've got lives. Hence why we started representative democracy in the first place, is because people have lives and they want to be able to do that other things than just focus on politics. But if you were to be able to build up almost like a kind of, and it does get into some slightly dodgy sci-fi territory here maybe, but like something along the lines of a kind of smart algorithm that was built on your previous voting behavior. And so your default, you have, like when you select cookies on your website and you just select your default preferences. You do have the option to change that at any time. You can change how much data people have on you. If we were to do that with a voting system, so that the absolute basic default is you have to have engaged to a certain level, and then essentially the computer will vote for you based on your previous engagements, until you get to a point where you decide you want to re-interact with the system and change your preferences, or interact and actually vote yourself. So some sort of kind of algorithmatized version of direct democracy. There's obviously going to be weaknesses with that as well, but I think that would be a real positive solution to the idea that we might struggle getting people to engage on a consistent basis.
So you would take you would make everyone take a form of political compass test and then like program the system to vote based on their beliefs. Yeah.
I think that would be one way of doing it, and then that it also is, as you say, there was a sort of AI element to it where eventually it would, machine learning even, where it would kind of learn the voting patterns and the kind of this sort of psychometric profile almost of the person doing the voting, so that when they do, so maybe they only want to vote once a year or once every couple of months or something like that, but that then when they do interact as the human, the computer is able to take that response, integrate it into their existing algorithm of how that human would vote on X issue, and then alter the course slightly in doing that. So yeah, it's it might be a bit of a way off, but that would be I can't see a better way at the moment of being able to keep the wheels of governance turning, by including everyone in it. If the whole point of representative democracy was almost to provide that, the representative is almost what that AI algorithm would be in the analog age. You almost want the technological version of that to kind of become the new norm, I think.
This sounds like the amazing beginning to some sort of dystopian sci-fi.
Well, that's the question, isn't it? But then all of these, any idea involving technology and politics is always susceptible to that negative turn with it. What I think our job as people who are thinking about this kind of thing is to make people aware that could be where it goes, but also put safeguards in place, or start thinking about what safeguards would be necessary in order to prevent things from going into that sort of negative dystopian territory. You don't sound convinced on that.
No, like, but any form of that, my immediate response is like, how can that be abused? Like, it's very well and good saying, we can do this, and then it's like going, well, Terminator's a good concept if you kind of ignore all the killing, like.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I guess that is the big question, and when you look at what's happening in current, or in the last few years of politics, in terms of how other sort of nefarious actors have kind of got involved and corrupted our politics, with social media and dark ads and all that kind of stuff. I suppose the first question you want to ask is how would they do that with this? So yeah, it would have to be something that was built in, the safeguards are built into the system, whatever that may be, and not to get too kind of zeitgeisty about it, but maybe that involves some sort of random anonymization with blockchain or something like that. Maybe it involves setting up some sort of system that essentially separates separates the person from the vote in some way. It becomes very complex, but it's something that I think is achievable with the technology. It's as you say, it's not necessarily about whether we can, it's whether we should, or how we do it.
Okay, well, why don't you tell us about this new project you're launching? Like, when you like, where did you first come up with the idea? Why did you think you had to do it? How was it producing it?
Yeah.
And give us the full description.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So yeah, I'm launching a new video series. It's called This Modern Philosophy, and it's about the taking ideas from the past around key concepts that we are currently kind of experiencing some uh, difficult discussions about. You know what we're having at the moment. And trying to work out what parts of those kind of ideas from history can we hold on to and grow, and which parts should we kind of put to one side and let them die. Um, I think we're what's becoming very clear is that the systems that we've had in place for the last, say, 100 years or so are are on their knees, and whatever kind of what we whatever happens now, something else is going to take its place. Now the question is, do we want to just sort of sit back and let things play out, or do we want to take an active role in deciding what that looks like, what that future looks like? So what I wanted to do with this video series essentially is look at some key concepts. So the first series is on democracy, as we've been discussing, and then there's going to be a series on capitalism, and some series on kind of more ethereal concepts, perhaps like happiness and things like that. But the idea being, we look at those kind of big thinkers and the big thoughts that they've had around those ideas in history, take the best of them as possible, and analyze them, work out which ones we want to keep and which ones we want to chuck away, and start thinking about how we would maybe integrate them into plans for the future.
Do you have a favorite? Is there like one specifically that you really think has a lot of legs to go far, or?
I'm really interested in. I've been going back. The first episode of the democracy series is about the ancient Greeks and ancient Athens. So I've gone back to understanding their kind of initial conceptions of democracy, but also what I found most interesting. Obviously, their system was a very direct democracy. So that's where some of these ideas I've been having have come from, but also some of the biggest criticisms of democracy came from the ancient Greeks, from Aristotle and Plato, or Socrates, where there's a kind of the problems that we're seeing today with democracy. They were there from the beginning. So I find it quite interesting that there's those issues that are kind of innate in the democratic system. The idea of people not being engaged in politics, or the people voting in demagogues, for example, because they haven't got that kind of level of understanding or engagement. Those problems were there from the start. So the question is, do we just then have to scrap the whole system because those problems are too insurmountable, or are there ways to overcome those problems that have been kind of built into the system? That's what I'm finding really interesting at the moment, is trying to grapple with that concept of whether or not it's, maybe we just need to get rid of it all and start again, or do we have, are there ways to actually evolve it and make it better?
Say we had to scrap the whole thing and start again. Would you start on a very local level, or would you start from the top down?
Yeah, I think local really. There's a lot of governing that can be done up to the local level that has as much of an impact on people's lives, if not more, than most of what happens from central government down. So yeah, I would say starting with kind of separate local states and work it out from that way. It becomes incredibly difficult when you have big global issues, as we discussed before. Like COVID-19, but also like climate change, or terrorism, or any of these kind of big issues, the existential issues that are kind of facing the whole world. That's where you struggle then at that point to work out a kind of coherent strategy across these local states, between the local states. So I think there's a question around how you would scale that up. But yeah, for at least for sort of the basic, the first 90% of what is important to people, I think can be done on a local level for certain.
Do you think that 90% though is like what matters to people on a local level is all but irrelevant when you consider it on a global scale with issues like you said, like, okay, right, COVID-19, but there's definitely other examples like pollution or climate change or terrorism, like you said, religious conflict, like the kind of East versus West spiritual clash that's going on in, I think, more in the heads of some paranoid right wingers than it actually is in the world. But like, it's definitely still there. Like, how do you see those things dealing with like much more global issues that you need like a global perspective on? Where you say there's corporations like Shell or Exxon or BP or even to like companies like, I don't know if Nike are still using sweatshops, but they definitely have been for years. And there's definitely like some massive corporations that are just taking advantage of the fact that everything is dealt with on a local level to exploit the world as a whole. Like, how do we combat that by starting locally?
So it's a really good question. I mean, the one example I would give at the moment would probably be if you look at the kind of climate change protests and climate change, and anti Extinction Rebellion and all that kind of stuff. The way in which they've pursued their agenda has been very much on a local scale first, and then kind of replicated across different territories. And the reason I go to that example is because essentially that is the problem. The problem that they're trying to address is a global problem, but the way that they're trying to address it is through a local, generally speaking, a local tactic. And whether or not they've been successful, I mean, probably you would say no at this stage, but they have brought that kind of climate consciousness into the mainstream. And you look at people, a lot of big corporations now are trying to work out how to kind of be green, essentially, how they can do that. And whether or not you think that's just sort of them paying lip service to the concept, it surely is better than not doing anything at all. And that has all come from this kind of grassroots pressure. So the question is can that be then replicated? If people fix their own houses or fix their own state or their own small local area, will that then kind of seep through into the kind of wider group, wider systems that we have for and governments and corporations might look at how those states, those smaller states have been organized and go, well, that's, we should take lessons from them, and we should, this is clearly the way that things are going. Let's governments and corporations are notoriously happy to jump on whichever bandwagon is pushing in whichever direction. So I think that would be the way to potentially solve that issue. Whether that would be fast enough, that's the big question. Really, is something like climate change. Will that come in and destroy everyone before we've got the chance to do it anyway? So
probably.
But probably, yeah.
Not to sound
too. That would be. What's that?
I said not to sound too pessimistic. So, what do you think the biggest change to come out of this global pandemic is going to be? Like, I'm trying to get a grasp on how much I think the world is actually going to change because of it. Because there is a timeline in which I can see this completely reshaping the way we think about almost everything, like globally, like supply chains, travel, like the amount in which we outsource services, goods, the seriousness with which we consider the threat of future pandemics to be, like how much we value each other and our communities and our ability to go out into the world, how much we will keep up the exercise that seems to have been inspired. Like, it's now that we're only allowed to go outside once for exercise, every single path and park is full, which is awesome. Like, it puts a smile on my face to like see people out and about and enjoying nature a little more. And like, I really do foresee a world in which this can be used for positive change. And on the other side, I also see the potential for absolutely nothing to change at all, and in 2 years' time, barely anyone ever like remembers the lessons that we were thinking that we might learn from this. Like, do you see there being a big change in any form of our lives?
I do, but I think that I completely agree with you. I think there's that other side of it that's suggesting that you know, but probably based on our own experience of history and how things pan out, is that we haven't seen things necessarily change that dramatically in even, you know, when you compare this to other events. I think this is probably one of the biggest events that's ever happened, well, certainly in my lifetime, and yet, you know, no other event previously has ever really had such a much of an impact. So yeah, there's an element of that kind of pessimism there, but I think if we were to take it on a kind of longer term view, if we sort of pull it out a little bit, and I think the reality is this is going to have an enormous impact on everything, but it just may not have an enormous impact straight away. And even in 2 years' time, 3 years' time, 4 years' time, it will just change. It will have changed the whole structure of things slightly. Now, one example of that is that the economy is set to shrink by probably 20-25%, something like that, at absolute, you know, best level. Now that immediately calls into question something like, for example, Brexit, whether or not Brexit is the correct decision for us to be making at a time when our economy.
Oh, they've made it very very clear that the government have repeatedly, like even 2 days ago said nope, 31st December still going ahead.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, they have, but there's also been, I've noticed with kind of sympathetic journalists, the likes of Isabel Oakeshott and people like that, who have been slowly leaking the seeds of kind of, there's going to be an extension and there's going to be a, you know, and it's the right thing to do in this current crisis and all that kind of thing. So I do think that to save face, the government they have to say that, but I don't think there's no way that Brexit's going to happen when it was set to happen. The question is whether if you've just had a year of the economy shrinking by 20-25%, do you then at that point say, right, well, let's knock another 5 or 10% off it with Brexit? Probably not. You have to be a bit suicidal.
Yeah, but
maybe our government is like that.
Yeah, but surely this is the exact reason we need to get out into the world and become Brexit Britain. You know, we don't need this pessimism. It's all going to be sunshine and rainbows. Yeah. Like that's how, I think honestly how it will be looked at. It'll be like, okay, well, this gives us even more of a reason that we need to go out and get our trade deals and stuff.
Maybe I don't think it will. Only that I see what's happened. What this crisis has brought into focus is what an actual crisis means. What happens when reality hits, when you can't just spin it politically. And my goodness, they are trying their best to spin out, you know, an answer on this, but the reality is that, you know, 1,000 people are dying every single day. You can't spin that. You can keep trying as much as you like, but you can't spin that. That impact, the effect effectively is like having been in a war for, you know, for however many years, is going to have some huge repercussions on the psyche of this nation and all nations. To the extent that I think people are going to be more reserved and wary and concerned about the prospect of something like Brexit and potentially anything that's kind of that level of risk involved in it, which does call into question how will things then progress, because obviously all of this is kind of based on an element of risk as well. The idea that we could maybe implement some sort of progressive direct democracy would be itself risky. But I think what's going to end up happening is that, quite honestly, this government won't last very long. We'll start seeing cracks appear. There's going to be an inquiry and questions to be answered based on the way they've handled it. If Labour were to then come in and you had Keir Starmer and as the Prime Minister, I think at that point there's going to be a kind of repositioning of how how British society is set up, much like what happened after the Second World War with Attlee. And I think that's essentially the point that we're going to get to in the next couple of years, is this kind of rebuilding from the ground up of British society. An vast extension of the welfare state, or something else, potentially, universal basic income is appearing more and more likely now in certainly in other countries. And I think the Pope even said yesterday that it's looking like it's needed. So my thinking is that essentially the next couple of years are going to be really, really tough. It's going to be a bit of a battle of how we want the society to be structured. But I do think it's going to be pushing towards Labour probably taking the reins. And if Labour take the reins, then they're going to be more focused on building a kind of, a bigger safety net and a bigger society, generally speaking. So when that's then built and there's a kind of structure in place from there, then I think you'll start seeing, now what does the next 20 years look like? What does the next 30, 50, 100 years look like? And at that point, that's when everything that's kind of happened now, all of the kind of experience that we've all had now, is going to start seeping into how we then start thinking about what we want the future to look like. And so that would be that's potentially, as you say, maybe an optimistic view of things. And there are always, the Dominic Cummings and Nigel Farages of this world, and Trumps and whoever else who are going to be trying to do other things. But I think this has knocked a lot of people for six, and that you can't underestimate what an impact that will have on how we do things.
You have got a much more positive outlook on this than I do. I do not see the Brexit date changing. I don't see the government changing for I really can't see another election before 5 years' time. The Tories,
wow, okay.
I've seen so many suggestions that Boris is going to have to resign after this, and honestly, that in my mind, that's based on a universe in which the Tories have shame and accountability, and all those things still matter, and I just don't think they do at all. I'm also in the boat where I believe that Trump is going to get another 4 years. I can't see him losing to Joe Biden.
I don't think that's, yeah.
So perhaps, my pessimism is justified. Perhaps your optimism will see us through, and maybe we'll end up somewhere in the middle, which wouldn't be too bad. When you consider the worst possible option at this point, I think somewhere in the middle would be all right.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so I think that's a nice place to leave it.
Okay.
So thanks for chatting to me. That was fun. I enjoyed that.
No problem.
You should
really good.
Give us a plug.
Yeah. So it's This Modern Philosophy, and thismodernphilosophy.com is the website, and you can search for it on YouTube and all the social media sites. The first episode will be out very soon, and there'll be more episodes coming soon on the theme of democracy, and then some new series after that as well. So yeah,
that's fantastic. I'll put all the links in the description. So thank you very much, and we will see you next time.
This is